Let's cover some basics of layer management. We've talked about the fact that you can select these different layers and move them as long as you're on the proper layer. We've talked about the significance of the background layer and the fact that it cannot have transparency behind it, and that if you try and delete something on a background layer, then you just get the fill option. And so what you need to do is rename it by double clicking on it and calling it something other than background. But I wanted to make you aware of the fact that if you move these around and decide that you don't want to see it anymore, you don't want to see it for now, there's this little eye icon, and this controls the visibility of each layer. So if you just click it, then that layer is no longer visible, like that. If you click and drag, you can move these around, and if this layer 0 was still background, we could not go below it, but right now we actually can. You can see this is all white, so the fact that we've dragged it below means it disappears. So that's the basic functionality there. We can also control the opacity and the fill. You'll notice I do this naturally because it's an old habit, but I want to point out that yes, you can type in 60%. You don't even have to do the percent here for opacity. You can also click this and you have this slider. But notice what I was doing before was actually clicking on the name opacity, and that's kind of a pro tip, I guess you'd say, because it really is fast and it's very nice. Also, you can hit the number 2 or 6 or 4, and you can start typing in different numbers, and that can be a very fast way of changing opacity. You can also change fill, and frankly, I mean, I think there is a reasonable difference between the two, but in my experience, opacity and fill are pretty much interchangeable. I usually use opacity because I think fill has to do with oh, I'm not even quite sure what the difference is. They're pretty similar in my experience. I mean, fill of 64% looks an awful lot like opacity of 64%. So anyway, those are the basic settings you can deal with there. You can also create groups of layers. So you can actually go down here to this. It looks like a file folder. If I click on it, then it creates group 1. So we could double click on that name and rename it our group. And then what you can do is you've got this expand and collapse button here. So if it's down, it's expanded, and if it's facing to the right, it's collapsed. But what we can do is we can actually drag into that group, so we can expand that, and we see these are the group, and then we can control visibility as a group. And there are other things too that can be nice to control as a group. And you can control drag out of that group if you need to, and you can right click and say delete group if you need to. Group and contents, that's fine because there's no contents. So those are the basics of layer management. And another thing we're going to cover in this video was tab management. And so supposing I had another image open, so I'll say new. This is something I didn't mention in the last video, is that yes, you can control it by pixel and dots per inch or pixels per inch, but you can also drop this down and say inches, and you can say 20 inches by 10 inches, and so now it'll be twice as wide as it is tall. So we can still say 150 dots per inch, RGB, background contents is white, or if you said transparent, then you actually won't get a background layer. We'll choose transparent this time. Say OK. You'll get a layer 1, and you'll notice it's all checkerboard, meaning it's all transparent. So if you were to save this as a file type that has a transparency support, like PNG or Photoshop JPEGs do not support transparency, by the way, then you would actually get true transparency. So from the get-go. And again, we could always go layer, new, background from layer if we decide we absolutely want a background layer. But what I was trying to say here is that now we have two tabs. You have this tab here and this tab here, and you can click and select. And we talked about the application bar before, and one of the important elements of the application bar is that you can actually choose this little gizmo or widget, whatever you want to call it. Drop this down. Oh, I'm sorry, it's this one. And you get these different options, and this is consolidate all, tile as grid, tile all vertically, and tile horizontally, or two up or two up in this orientation versus this orientation. And this may be clearer on your screen than it is on the video. I'm sure it is. But the point here is that you can actually, rather than just the consolidate all, which is the default, you could actually compare these two images and have two up, hence the name, two up. And so you could actually compare images. So that may not be something you use often, but I wanted to point it out since we're cruising through the interface here and talking about the different features. Just wanted to point that out. I'm going to go back to consolidate all. And also, one last thing I'll point out, because I might not remember to point it out later, is that if you do have an asterisk here, and again it might be clearer on your screen, but if after the file name and then the it says layer 1 RGB/8 parentheses, if you have a little asterisk at the end there, it means that there are changes made in here that are unsaved. So an asterisk means there are unsaved changes, and it's right there. So just a little tip by the by. So that covers basic layer management and organization, as well as tab management.